Hello, friends. Welcome. My name is Lisa Graustein. I'm a member of Beacon Hill Meeting in Boston, and this is the third in a three-part series on our Minute Around Climate Change as part of the larger series I'm doing as our virtual plenary as we explore the theme, what does it mean to provoke one another to love? And so the first two videos in this climate change segment focused on what did our minutes around climate change actually say, and then what were some of the patterns and systems and ways of being around climate change and our relationship to the environment. This third video is going to offer two spiritual practices. So the first spiritual practice that I want to offer is ways for us to center the interconnectedness in ways that are real for us. And so the example I want to share with you is something my son and I did together a number of years ago. When Maniwakani, the Standing Rock encampment, was happening in North Dakota in response to the pipeline, I really wanted to support that movement. My son was young at the time. I was caring for two sick parents. I had very little extra time and capacity, but I also wanted my young son to understand what that movement was about and what the water protectors were doing. And so the idea that he and I came up with together was to think about how what the water protectors were doing connected to our day-to-day life. And so we wrote little cards that said Standing Rock, and we put them above the sinks in our house and our thermostat. And it meant that every time we went to turn on the water, every time I went to adjust the thermostat, we were reminded of the people who were putting their lives on the line to protect water, to protect the land that had been entrusted to their ancestors, and to protect the well-being of this earth for all of us. This action didn't give them support, and so I had to find other ways of doing that. But it did bring that movement into our house. And in addition to reminding us to take a moment and pray for the people who were putting their lives in harm's way for the greater protection of all of us and standing up to protect our waters and our world, it also meant that we used less water in our house. We were more conscious of it. And it meant that every time I thought, oh, I'm chilly, let me go turn out the thermostat, I really had to say, am I as cold as the people at the camps right now? Is there a way that I can continue to lower my oil usage and still be comfortable in my home? And so it had a practical impact. But first and foremost, it was a spiritual one. And because these were written in our bathroom, in our kitchen, and in our front entryway when people walk in, where our thermostat is, it meant lots of people asked. My son's friends asked, my friends asked, people coming to our house asked. And it was a way for us to share about what was happening at Standing Rock, as well as a way to ask people, how do you sit in relationship to the resources you're using, without judgment, without preaching, but just inviting people into that conversation. And where I also then had to get honest about the resources that I was using. You'll see in the picture on the kitchen sink, my son also added some dinosaurs because as we were talking about this, he said, well, then we have to remember the creatures that were here first. So that was his contribution to this practice that now, 5 years later, is still a part of our household. The second practice I want to offer is just a meditation of a way to be consciously in and of creation. I'm going to talk about it, and then I'm going to invite friends to actually step into it with me. And so when I think about how to be part of creation, and a lot of this I learned from my mother, who was an incredible Catholic worker and environmental activist, I think first about getting centered, that always we have to make space to dissipate the noise of the day-to-day we live in. I think about how I can physically connect to the earth. And when we actually do this practice, I would invite you to go outside. I can't record outside and have the sound quality work. So I'm sitting here in my house, but I'm sitting in front of some of my plants that I love. And I'm conscious that my feet are on a wooden floor that was once a growing tree. And so any way that we can actually connect. So I've taken my shoes off. I'm gonna, touch my plants a little bit. Any ways that we can physically connect to the natural world consciously. And then part of this process for me is remembering the history of where we are. I live in the Ashmont neighborhood of Dorchester in Boston, and Ashmont is an English corruption of a Wampanoag word that means a place where a spring is. And so I haven't been able to find it. I don't know if it still exists, but I know that somewhere in my neighborhood at some point there was a freshwater spring, and that my neighborhood is located on the traditional path between the winter and summer encampments of the Massachusetts people who lived here long before colonial settlers showed up and took over the land. And so as I sit into this meditation, part of what I'm doing is reminding myself not just of my 20-year history of living in this space, and not just the history of the colonization of this space, but also the people who lived here before Europeans arrived and colonized, and the people for whom this was a waypoint in their fall and spring journeys where they would find fresh water. And thinking back to even before we have record and information about who lived here and who tended this land and who cared for it, and bringing all of that into my meditation. And so I invite you, if you don't know the history of the land that you are living on, to do some of that research and find out what that history is and whose ancestral land are you living on if it's not your own. The next part of the meditation is about opening our senses fully. That often in Quaker meaning for worship, I find I sort of try to tune out the noises of people, clearing their throats, the babies making the joyful little noises they make. That for me in meeting, I'm often trying to really focus internally, and that means kind of shutting down or disconnecting a little bit the outside stuff. And in this meditation, it's really about being open to all of creation. And depending on how good the microphone on my computer is, you might hear the birds outside in my yard that are really joyful today. You will probably hear some of the traffic sounds because I live in a busy part of the city. But just opening fully to the sounds, to the smells, to the senses, as a way of remembering that we are of this earth. We are creatures of this earth. We are animals. And what it means to have the full range of the senses we have access to feel and know the earth. That it is not just an intellectual knowing, it's not just a visual knowing, but it's a tactile knowing and it's a sensory knowing. And then once we sort of settle down through those pieces in our meditation, the final invitation is to expand our awareness beyond what we can see and touch right now to whatever part of creation in the world we have some connection with, be it a place we have been, something we are reading about, things we're hearing about in the news, but where the invitation is to expand, to grow out, to make those connections beyond, because that is part of the interconnectedness of all of us. Excuse me. So I am now going to guide us through this meditation process. If you're watching this inside, I invite you to stop, to go back to the NEYM webpage and download the podcast version, and take your phone outside. And if you can sit on the ground, to sit on the ground, to sit in a chair with your feet without shoes on, to actually physically touch the earth. I can't do that and make this recording work. So here, if you're not able to go outside, here's 2 pictures of my backyard and things in places where I would sit if I were able to do this outside. So I invite you to sit with your feet or your bottom touching the earth, to take off your shoes, to expand your toes out, to release your shoulders, maybe roll them up and down a few times. Do whatever you need to do to get physically comfortable in your space and to get your body in whatever is a comfortable alignment and position for being for a while. And just take a few deep breaths at your own pace, whatever's going to work best for you. I often place one hand on my belly and one on my chest, so as I'm breathing in, I'm expanding my stomach, my belly, and expanding my rib cage. And I breathe out, they're collapsing back towards my spine. And placing my hands there just as a reminder to really let those spaces expand to their fullness, to be into those spaces, to breathe fully. You may want to place your hands on your knees or on your lap, whatever is going to be comfortable for you. I invite you to close your eyes or just pick a point a few feet ahead of you that you can stare at without looking, and just let your eyes rest. And as you let your eyes rest, notice where you're making physical contact with the earth. Notice what parts of you are touching, where and how the air is playing on your skin. If you are inside and unable to be touching the earth right now, notice what you are touching that comes from the earth, because all of it comes from the earth. Maybe you're sitting on a wooden chair that was once a tree. Maybe you're on something more formed by humans, but that was once something in the ground that got pulled up and manipulated. But just make that connection and notice where and how you are physically in contact with that. And if you have been able or already know some of the history of the land upon which you are sitting right now, take a moment to walk back through time, to remember when you first came to this place, when people like you first came to this place. And if, like me, you are not indigenous to this continent, when the peoples who are indigenous to this continent came to this place, and what you know of the names they gave to this land, what you know of the ways they tended this land, and how they lived here and continue to live here today. And then imagine moving further back in time before people inhabited this continent, so 100,000 years ago, when it sat in a different place on the earth, in different relation to the other continents, when there were other creatures who called this place home. And feel the fullness of creation, the creation that we are able to see and experience now, the creation that came before us, and the creation that with our care will follow. And as you sit in this place, as you place yourself in the timeline of creation for this one brief moment, feeling some of the fullness of who has been here, who will come, who has created the very soil that you are sitting on. Open your senses more fully and keep your eyes softly focused, but really notice what your feet are feeling. If you are sitting on the ground, what it actually feels like to sit on the ground, to place your hands down into the soil or the grass or the stone upon which you sit. As you inhale, be aware of the smells, that which come from the earth, that which come from plants and animals, that which people have created. And as you continue to sit and breathe into this space, expand your ears, not just to the loudest sounds or the ones most demanding your attention, but to the softer, gentler ones, where leaves might be rubbing together, there might be a bug, you might hear the ocean or water, whatever the sounds are that you are hearing. And when you next inhale, at whatever pace is right for you, imagine all the pores on your exposed skin opening wider, taking in oxygen, taking in sunlight, connecting with the biome that lives on your skin and is connected to the earth. And just feel your body in this space. Feel yourself a part of the earth. Feel yourself a creature of the earth. Feel yourself part of the interconnected web of life that was and is and will be. And allow the day-to-day and the human parts of yourself to recede a little bit. And just feel, hear, sense, taste, listen to the aspects of just being a creature in creation and being a beautiful creature of God's design and creation. And when you feel ready, take that awareness, that expansion of your senses, and grow it outward. What do you know is beyond the land you are sitting on right now? What do you know is beyond what you can see? Where is your heart and spirit drawn? Is it someplace else in your immediate community? Is it another part of our nation, another part of the world. And as you continue to sit in this space, as you breathe in the oxygen the plants around you have created for you, expand your sense of being out to someplace else in creation. And however you visualize that in your head, however you have sense memories of other places you have been, however you imagine the places you have not yet been, however you experience that connection, just notice what images come up for you, what senses come up for you, what experiences, and where there's an invitation to connect with wider creation. And whenever you are ready to end this time of meditation, I invite you to take your hands and rub them together to build up some energy and friction. Get them going. Take a deep breath and place them over your ears. Place them over your eyes. Place them over your heart. And then wherever you can, to give some gratitude to the earth, to the plants, to the environment that sustains us. And if you have been watching or listening to this with other people or want some questions to reflect on yourself, I invite you to consider, as you engaged with this, what did you notice in your body? How are you feeling right now, physically, emotionally, energetically? How do you connect with creation in your spiritual life? And how are you called to care for creation? Thank you, friends.